Chapter 1. People from your background don't lead. The conference room always felt colder than the rest of the floor, not physically, though the AC was always too aggressive, but emotionally. Glass walls, steel frames, a long polished table that reflected your face back at you whether you wanted to see it or not. It was designed to remind you where you stood. Or more accurately, where you didn't. That morning, I stood just outside the room, clutching my notebook a little tighter than usual, listening to the muffled voices inside. Laughter. Confident. Male. Familiar. I took a breath before walking in. I had learned how to do that early in life: pause, inhale, steady myself. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, daughter of a factory worker and a school cafeteria manager, you learned quickly that hesitation could be mistaken for weakness. And weakness was never forgiven. I walked in anyway, heads turned. Some nodded. Some didn't. A few pairs of eyes flicked down, always the same quick scan. Shoes. Suit. Hair. I knew the look. I took my seat near the middle of the table, opened my notebook, and waited. This was supposed to be a routine leadership strategy meeting. Quarterly projections. Expansion planning. Titles and decisions that would shape the next 5 years of the company. It was the kind of meeting people prepared weeks forward. I had prepared for years. My boss, Richard, stood at the head of the table. Late 50s. Perfectly tailored navy suit. Silver hair that somehow made him look more authoritative instead of older. He had the kind of presence that filled a room without effort, and he knew it. Let's get started, he said, tapping the table once. We don't have all day. Slides appeared on the screen behind him. Numbers. Growth curves. Market forecasts. I followed along, pen moving, mind sharp. I had helped build half of those projections. Quietly. Behind the scenes. The way I always did. About 20 minutes in, the discussion shifted. We need to decide who's going to lead the new division, Richard said, folding his arms. This isn't just another department. This is visibility. Authority. Representation. My heart beat a little faster, but I kept my face neutral. I had been managing the pilot program for over a year. I had increased revenue by 23%. Reduced turnover. Stabilized a team everyone else had written off. On paper, I was the obvious choice. Around the table, names started coming up. All men. All senior. All safe. I waited. Finally, Richard's eyes landed on me, not with interest, with something else. He smiled, but not warmly. Well, he said, tilting his head slightly, I know some of you might be thinking about unconventional options. A few people chuckled politely. He gestured vaguely in my direction. But leadership isn't just about numbers. It's about presence. Background. The ability to command a room. The air shifted. Subtle. Heavy. I felt my chest tighten. Richard continued, his voice calm, almost conversational. Let's be honest. People from your background don't lead. Silence, not the kind that happens when people are thinking, the kind that happens when something has gone very wrong. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. My ears rang. For a split second, I was 10 years old again, standing in a school hallway while a teacher told me I should aim lower. 16, being asked if college was too ambitious. 22, being told I was lucky to even be here. I swallowed. Richard wasn't done. This company needs faces that inspire confidence, he added. And that's not something you can learn. It's innate. He smiled again. I looked down at my notebook. My handwriting had gone rigid, angular. No one spoke, not one person defended me. That hurt more than his words. I could feel the heat rising behind my eyes, but I refused to let it spill over. Crying would have been a gift to him. Anger, too obvious. Silence was my shield. I understand, I said calmly. My voice didn't shake. Richard nodded, satisfied, and turned back to the screen, already moving on. But something had changed, not in the room. In me, because while he was speaking, while he was reducing my entire life to a stereotype he found convenient, a quiet realization settled into place. He had no idea who he was talking to. No idea what I had built. No idea what my name actually meant. And very soon, everyone in that room was going to find out. Chapter 2, The silence after the words. The meeting ended the way most uncomfortable meetings do: too fast. Too polite. Too quiet. Chair slid back. Laptop snapped shut. People avoided eye contact like it was contagious. Someone made a joke that didn't land. Someone else pretended to take a phone call. The glass walls reflected a room full of people eager to escape what had just happened. I gathered my notebook slowly, not because I was shaken, but because I didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me rush. As I stood, Richard gave me a brief nod. Professional. Dismissive. Like the conversation had been settled, like I had been placed back where he thought I belonged. I walked out of the conference room with my head up, heels clicking against the floor in a steady rhythm. Every step echoed louder than it should have. Or maybe that was just my heartbeat in my ears. The hallway felt longer than usual. I passed coworkers who suddenly found the carpet fascinating. Others offered tight smiles, the kind that said, "I saw what happened, but I won't touch it." A few looked genuinely uncomfortable. One woman from finance caught my eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry." I nodded. Sorry didn't change anything. When I reached my office, I closed the door and leaned against it for just a second. 1 second, that was all I allowed myself. Then I straightened, walked to my desk, and sat down. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I had imagined a moment like this before. Not this exact one, but something close. A moment where the mask slipped. Where the truth came out loud instead of hidden in subtext and side comments. Still, hearing it said so plainly, "people from your background don't let," had landed differently than I expected. Not like a punch, more like a line being crossed. I stared at my computer screen without really seeing it. Emails stacked up. Calendar reminders. Deadlines that suddenly felt trivial. My phone buzzed. A message from Mark, one of the senior managers. That was rough. "You okay?" I didn't respond. Then another message. And another. Different people. Similar tone. Sympathy without commitment. No outrage. No confrontation, just distanced. I leaned back in my chair and let my mind drift somewhere else, somewhere older. I thought about my mother waking up at 4:30 every morning to make breakfast before her shift. About my father coming home smelling like oil and metal, hands cracked and sore, still asking about my homework like it mattered more than his exhaustion. I thought about the scholarship letters. The part-time jobs. The way I learned to speak carefully, dress conservatively, never draw too much attention. I had built my career on being invisible and indispensable. Apparently, that wasn't enough. There was a knock on my door. I looked up. "Come in." It was Linda from HR, late 40s. Sharp blazer. Kind eyes, but cautious. "Hey," she said softly. "Just checking in." I gestured to the chair. "I'm fine." She sat anyway. "I want you to know," she began, choosing her words like stepping stones, "what was said in there, that's not aligned with our values." I almost laughed. "But?" I asked. She sighed. "But challenging Richard publicly is complicated." Of course it was. "I'm documenting the meeting," she added quickly. "Just in case." Just in case. I nodded again. After she left, the office felt even quieter. I turned my chair toward the window. The city stretched out below, glass, concrete, motion. So many people moving with purpose, unaware that a single sentence could still shrink a room. That was when my email notification chimed. 1 message. No subject line, just my name. I opened it. The sender wasn't someone I interacted with often. In fact, I'd only met him once, briefly, years ago. The company's founder, the name at the very top of the org chart, the one people spoke about in reverent tones. The email was short. "I was informed about what happened in today's meeting. We need to talk." Jay, my pulse quickened. I reread the message 3 times. Informed by who? About which part? I glanced at the time. 5 minutes ago. The meeting had barely ended. I felt something unfamiliar rise in my chest. Not fear, not hope, something sharper, anticipation. I closed my laptop, stood up, and picked up my coat. As I walked toward the elevator, I caught my reflection in the glass. Same suit Richard had mocked with his eyes. Same posture. Same face, but I didn't look small. I looked ready, because somewhere between the conference room and that email, I realized something important. Richard thought my background was a weakness. He had no idea it was the reason I knew exactly how to survive moments like this, and how to turn them around. Chapter 3. The name above the door. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt unreal, not dramatic. Not cinematic quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of everything, your breathing, the hum of the cables, the slight tremor in your hands that you refuse to acknowledge. I stepped out onto a floor I had only visited once before. Thick carpet. Softer lighting. No cubicles. No noise. Just doors with names that carried weight. At the end of the hallway was the largest one. Frosted glass. Dark wood frame. The name above it was simple. No title. No ego, just a last name everyone in the company knew. I knocked. Come in, a voice said. I opened the door. He was standing by the window, not behind his desk. Late 60s. Tall. Casual blazer instead of a suit. The kind of confidence that didn't need tailoring. He turned and smiled, not politely, not performatively, genuinely. You must be wondering why I asked you here, he said. Yes, I replied. I am. He gestured to a chair, then sat across from me. I don't attend many strategy meetings anymore, he said. But I hear about them. I waited, and I hear very clearly when something doesn't sit right. He folded his hands. Looked at me directly. Tell me, he said, what exactly happened in that room today? I could have softened it. Reframed it. Protected the company. I didn't. I told him everything. Word for word. Tone for tone. The laugh. The pause. The silence after. I watched his expression carefully, not for anger, but for recognition. It came slowly. That's unfortunate, he said finally. I nodded. It was. He leaned back. Richard believes leadership looks a certain way. I said nothing. He always has. The founder stood and walked to a shelf behind his desk. He pulled out a thin folder and placed it on the table between us. Do you know what this is? He asked. I shook my head. 5 years ago, he said, our European expansion was failing. Quietly. Expensively. My stomach tightened. I was advised to shut it down, he continued. Instead, I asked for a different solution. One that didn't require visibility. Just results. He slid the folder closer. Inside were reports. Revenue charts. Retention data.my data.my handwriting, scanned and formalized. You built that model, he said. Didn't you? Yes, I replied, under a different manager, he added. Without public credit. Yes. He nodded. And the domestic pilot program last year? Yes. And the restructuring that saved us $8 million during the supply chain crisis? Yes. He smiled faintly. Do you know why I remember your name? He asked. I hesitated. Because of the results? Because of the restraint, he corrected. You never once asked for recognition. People from privileged backgrounds usually do. I felt something shift in my chest. My background, I said carefully, taught me not to expect it. He looked at me for a long moment. That, he said, is exactly why I asked you here. He stood again and walked back to the window. Richard thinks leadership is inherited, he said. I think it's earned. He turned back to me. I'm restructuring the new division, he said. Quietly. Effective immediately. My pulse spiked. I want you to lead it. The room seemed to tilt. I started. He raised a hand. There will be no announcement yet. No grand reveal. I want to observe. Observe what? I almost asked, but I already knew. How people behave, he continued, when they think nothing has changed. He picked up his phone. There will be one more meeting, he said. Same room. Same people. I swallowed. And Richard? I asked. He smiled again. Richard will be there, he said. And he will speak. I left the office 15 minutes later. Same elevator. Same reflection, but nothing felt the same, because now I understood something clearly. My name didn't matter because of where it came from. It mattered because of where it had already been, and soon, everyone would hear it spoken very differently. Chapter 4. The same room, different power. The invitation for the follow-up meeting arrived the next morning. Same conference room. Same attendees. Same agenda title, asterisk leadership alignment, asterisk nothing about it hinted that anything had changed. That was the point. I arrived 10 minutes early. The room was empty when I walked in, the long table untouched, the chairs still perfectly aligned. Sunlight poured through the glass walls, making everything look clean, neutral, harmless. I chose the same seat I had taken before, middle of the table. Slightly off-center, unassuming, people began to file in. The energy was different this time, subtle, but noticeable. Conversations were quieter. Laughter felt forced. A few people glanced at me, then away, like they weren't sure what version of me they were about to get. Richard arrived last. Of course he did. He walked in with the same confidence as before, placing his laptop at the head of the table, greeting people with nods and half-smiles. When his eyes landed on me, he paused for just a fraction of a second, barely perceptible, but I saw it. He remembered. Let's begin, he said, clearing his throat. The presentation started. Slides clicked by. Familiar numbers. Familiar talking points. I listened, not because I needed the information, but because I needed to understand how he was going to frame the story. When the topic of the new division came up again, Richard straightened. As we discussed previously, he said, this role requires a very specific leadership profile. My jaw tightened. He gestured toward the screen, listing vague attributes. Vision. Authority. Gravitas. Then he named the candidate he had chosen. A senior manager. Predictable. Safe. A man who had never run a team larger than 10 people. A man whose numbers were average at best. There were nods around the table. No one challenged it. Richard smiled, satisfied. Any questions? He asked. I raised my hand. The room froze. Richard blinked, clearly not expecting that. Yes, he said. I kept my voice calm. Measured. I have one, I said. Before we finalize this, can we review the performance data from the pilot program again? A murmur rippled through the room. Richard's smile tightened. I don't see how that's necessary. I do, I replied, silenced. I stood and walked toward the screen before he could stop me. Plugged in my flash drive. The projector flickered. New slides appeared. Not his, my revenue growth. Team retention. Market penetration. Every number spoke clearly. I led this program, I said. These results came from the division everyone else passed on. Richard shifted in his seat. I also designed the restructuring model used in Europe, I continued, clicking forward. And the supply chain mitigation plan that saved us $8 million last year. Heads turned, eyes widened, the room leaned in. I didn't ask to be considered before, I said. But after last week, I think clarity matters. Richard stood abruptly. This is highly inappropriate, he snapped. You were not invited to present. That's when the door opened, every head turned, the founder walked in. No announcement. No ceremony, just presence. Actually, he said calmly, she was. Richard's face drained of color. The founder took a seat, not at the head of the table, but beside me. I've been observing, he said. And I think it's time we stop confusing comfort with competence. No one spoke. He looked directly at Richard. You said people from her background don't lead, he said evenly. Yet every major success we've had recently traces back to her work. Richard opened his mouth, nothing came out. The founder turned back to the room. As of today, he said, the new division reports directly to me. A pause, and she leads it. The silence this time was different, heavy. Final. I didn't smile. I didn't need to, because in that moment, I understood something deeply. The room hadn't changed, the power in it had. Chapter 5. When my name spoke for itself, the meeting ended without applause. No congratulations. No speeches, just the quiet shuffling of papers, chairs moving back, and people recalibrating their understanding of the room they were in. Richard didn't look at me as he gathered his things. He avoided the founder's eyes too. The confidence he used to wear so effortlessly now hung loose, like a suit that no longer fit. One by one, people filed out, some nodded at me differently this time. Slower. More deliberate. A few offered small smiles, not pity, not apology, but recognition. That mattered more than I expected. The founder stood as the room emptied. You handled that well, he said. I didn't plan to speak, I admitted. He smiled. You didn't need to. Your work already had. He left without another word. No press release followed that day. No company-wide email, just a quiet update in the internal system, a new reporting structure, a new division, my name where it hadn't been before, and that was intentional. The weeks that followed were revealing. People who had never made time for me suddenly had availability. Calendars opened. Opinions shifted. Suggestions became questions. Richard kept his distance. He stayed professional, but small things changed. He stopped interrupting. Stopped explaining things I already knew. Stopped making assumptions about what I could or couldn't handle. We never spoke about that first meeting again. We didn't need to. Leading the division was harder than I expected, but not because of the work was familiar. Strategy. People. Decisions under pressure. What was new was being seen. Being watched, being evaluated not as potential, but as proof. I made mistakes. Owned them. Fixed them. I also succeeded, quietly, consistently, the same way I always had. 6 months later, the numbers spoke again. Growth surpassed projections. Turnover dropped to its lowest point in company history. 2 other divisions asked to replicate our model. This time, my name was mentioned out loud. At a company-wide meeting, the founder stood on stage. He talked about leadership, not pedigree. Not polish, but perspective, he said. The kind earned, not inherited. Then he said my name. The applause surprised me. I didn't cry, but later that night, sitting alone in my apartment, I thought about my parents. About how far that factory floor was from this moment. About how many times I had been told, directly or quietly, that leadership wasn't meant for people like me. I realized something then. My boss hadn't been wrong about one thing. Background does matter. It shapes how you listen. How you endure. How you lead when no one is watching. He just misunderstood what mine meant, because when my name finally changed everything, it wasn't because it sounded powerful. It was because it already was.